Armillaria root rot is a disease that is caused by several species of Armillaria. This is a fungus it's a basidiomycete fungus that produces mushrooms, and there are a number of species found worldwide, and they infect the roots of trees and other woody plants, in fact, a number of different species. In fact, it has a wide host range, and it can affect many, many species, depending on where you're at in the world and what species of Armillaria. This is an important root disease. It can affect commercially important tree species, including a lot of our most important timber species in certain parts of the world. The fungi infect the roots and can colonize large areas of underground tissues and can really invade large areas underground. The fungus, like I said, it produces these mushrooms, and they're very distinctive in that you don't see typically a single mushroom. Typically what you see is a large cluster of mushrooms at a time, and actually large numbers of clusters of mushrooms, usually, in an area. So here I'm holding a dried specimen or a dried cluster of mushrooms, and you see there's many of them together, and this is typical of Armillaria, okay? So the fungus produces these above ground, and of course the mushrooms are the fruiting structures. These are think of these as like the flower of the fungus. This is how it reproduces. It produces spores. But in addition, it produces other structures. It produces what are known as rhizomorphs. These rhizomorphs are these thread-like structures that are actually quite thick and large compared to other vegetative structures of the fungus. I think, fungi produce what are called hyphae, and together we call that the mycelia, which are, the thread-like part of the fungus that allows it to, the body of the fungus that allows it to, colonize and to interact with its environment. That's mostly microscopic. You don't see that unless there's a lot of it together. But this part, the rhizomorph, allows it to move through the soil, and basically utilize what we call chemotaxis, or allows it to interact with the soil chemistry and enable it to identify where there's a susceptible tree. And it comes in contact with the tree, with the roots, by way of these rhizomorphs, and then it colonizes the roots of a susceptible tree, and then it begins to invade that tree, and then it infects the roots, and it starts to kill the roots and decay the roots. And so then that's why we call it Armillaria root rot, because it rots the roots, it kills the roots and decays the roots. And so over time, you end up with trees that die. So the initial infection begins with spores, though, because these spores are airborne, and they will land on cut stumps or wounds at the bases of trees, broken off trees or broken roots and things like that. And that's where the initial infection will begin. But then once that starts, it's able to move through the soil, and you can have pockets of trees die. And so you can get that sort of pocket mortality that we talked about with other root diseases. So this is sort of the biology and how this happens. And what you're really looking for with this disease are, well, above ground, you might see trees that are declining, you might see trees that are dying, but below ground or near the ground, you might see these fruiting structures, the mushrooms, which are only produced at certain times of the year. Here in Florida, we see them kind of at sort of 2 points in time. Usually we see them in the fall, or we see most of them like in October, November, and then we might see them again during the beginning of the rainy season, like in June and July. We might see a second sort of flush of these. Now, you might see these rhizomorphs, although the species that we see most commonly in Florida doesn't produce a lot of rhizomorphs, but you might see those. And then if you have a tree that is infected, and here we have, this was a nursery-grown plant that had a poor root structure, and it was stressed, which Armillaria often infects stressed trees. But under the bark, it produces a lot of mycelium, and so you'll see that white mycelium under the bark. And if you peel away the bark of an infected tree, right at the base of it, when it infects the roots, on the roots themselves, you'll see that white mycelium, and then under the bark at the base of it, you'll see a lot of that white mycelium as well. And interestingly, just I'll mention this, but some of these Armillaria actually are bioluminescent. And so if you were to look at some of these in the dark, if you were to peel away the bark, you would see that these actually will glow in the dark, which is pretty interesting. And that's just a bit of their natural history. So their basic identification, if you see the fruiting bodies, the mushrooms, these clusters of mushrooms are quite distinctive. They're usually a honey brown, yellow brown. In fact, sometimes they're referred to as the honey mushroom because of that. If you see these thread-like structures, the rhizomorphs, and in conjunction with that, the white mycelium common at the base of these infected trees and on the roots with decay associated, those are all kind of common identifying features of Armillaria root rot.